Hey guys, I want to share with you a dream that I had back in March of 2019. And then after I share the dream with you, I want to open up a discussion about what this sort of a dream means, what it implies, what you take as symbolism, what you take as for certain future, or how you interpret and take various things. And I think that there's a general strategy regarding dream interpretation here that depending on what strategy you take, you can come away from this sort of a dream. And I'm sure many of you have had dreams that would have, the nature of grandeur about them. You can take those dreams a lot of different ways, and I just want to open up a discussion about that after I share the dream. So let me share the dream and give you some context, and then let's go into a discussion about how to go about interpreting this sort of a dream. Okay, so from my dream journal, March 15th, 2019, I said this. Last night, I had a frightful dream. I was invited to play and sing special music at our old church, which for me was, I grew up in a sort of very conservative, independent Baptist church. And so it was just little church building, stained glass windows, nice big, wooden vaulted ceiling, and, that sort of a thing. Very traditional church. And I've been a church musician for a very long time. So that was sort of like in the dream, my sort of a default profession. Okay, so I was invited to play and sing at our old church, and I realized I didn't have a song picked out. So I was scanning my mind, thinking of what sort of a song might be appropriate for this context. And I had been sort of like in different cultures of music for kind of a long time. So because of that, like my most recent memories of songs weren't really from the hymn book or something like that, would come from that sort of traditional upbringing, but we're instead more in this sort of like, the sort of stream of consciousness, prophetic, the very emotional driven sorts of songs that are out these days. So I didn't really have a working repertoire in my mind that would be appropriate. So I pulled out a hymnal from one of the back of the pews, and I began looking through the songs, trying to find a song that would be appropriate. I knew the service was going to be in a very traditional form. And I looked out and I saw a lot of people that I knew, and I just had this feeling of just deep affection for everyone there. And I was just feeling like these are my people. Oh, I'm so happy to see them, And so in the next instant, I realized that I was actually wearing pajamas. And I was like, oh, like this isn't going to work. And so I kind of felt embarrassed, and I wanted to go change. I went down to the basement to see if I could change quickly, and I saw a clock that said that it was a few minutes, maybe like 5 minutes before 12 o'clock. Now, the 12 o'clock hour, I actually don't really know in this dream if that was referring to like the noon hour, which would have made more sense for a church event, but given that the rest of the dream like was occurring at nighttime, it almost like makes more sense that was actually talking about midnight. So anyway, the clock was, I believe it was referring maybe to like the midnight hours, like so that midnight. But anyway, so it didn't really make sense for the context of like having a church event. But anyway, I feel like in the dream symbolism, it all made sense. So I speculated I had maybe another 5 minutes to get ready for this event. I didn't actually know when the event started, but I was like, oh man, I hope I have enough time. So I was aiming to make sure that I was dressed and that I like got the right clothes and that I was back up in 5 minutes. So I ended up finding a closet, and it was almost like I discovered my room that I used to have like in my parents' house, and I had like this big sliding door closet and like all these clothes hanging in there. And there were a bunch of clothes in there that weren't really familiar. They weren't really mine, but I just pulled something out and quickly changed. And then I went back up. So I went back up to the main sanctuary of the church. And then I sat on stage with some others who were there. And maybe they were part of a choir or something. And we were on top of a huge platform. Now, what I mean by huge platform, it was like we were sitting like on an elevated platform, like in one of these sorts of churches. There's, you have some stairs leading up to a platform where there's the podium, and then you can have like your choir set up behind that. And it was something like that, except that where I was sitting, it was almost like, you sit on like pews or something, but it was like that area where we were all sitting, like, was just very tall. And it had the feeling like it grew taller, like while we were sitting there. And it just was like suddenly so tall. Like I just got like this very intense vertigo feeling. And so the place where we were actually sitting was very narrow, like a church pew or like a bench or something. And someone was kind of like playing around, and they like bumped it. They were like bumping it, and it was like rocking back and forth. And it was like, oh my goodness, like this is like freaking me out. And I was just like so scared. Like I like the feeling inside of me was like, oh my goodness, I'm so scared. And I was trying to like get other people to notice like what these people were doing to like stop the rocking of this platform back and forth. But like I just felt so powerless. I was like so scared. I just like cried and curled up into a ball, like hoping that it wouldn't fall. Like I felt like I was so powerless to do anything about it. So anyway, I don't really know how all that resolved, but I think that was revealing something about maybe my own internal feelings of just kind of being scared to do some of these things. But anyway, so somehow all of this resolved, and so the service had begun, and now at some point it was my turn to present the song that I had chosen. So I had picked a song, some hymn or something. And it seemed to be the only one that I could really find that was relevant to the event. And it seemed like the song itself was about mothers and children. And so because it was about mothers and children, I almost like then make like a backwards inference that this must have been some sort of a nice church event about like Mother's Day or something. You know how like churches have these events centered around these themes or something. I just had the feeling like this was an event centered around something nice and flowery and like, oh, like it's so loving, mothers and children, and like something like that. And so when I had picked out that song, I was like, okay, like, well, here's the meaning I'll attach to this song. Like, I'm going to perform this song, and then I'm going to intend to tell the crowd about truths about relationships and how we should cultivate those relationships with our kids, and maybe share some stories of my own life as a parent, or like some of these other things. And so I before I began the song, I started off with some sort of an introduction of myself, and then relating like my love for the people that were in the church, and even just kind of pointing out some of the people that I knew. And like it was just a very like cordial, like very social, very like loving communal sort of feeling, like, aw, like these are all these people that I like, and so that was the feeling. So in the midst of all of this, and I don't think I've yet presented my song, I just had begun with this sort of introduction of like just relating to the audience. And then suddenly, as I was talking, somehow the whole ceiling of the church was just gone. Like I just could see through the ceiling of the church. It was completely transparent. And then I was looking up, and I was seeing the night sky above everyone. I saw many stars, and then I saw something that was moving just very slightly, and it was very like strange. Like there was a strange motion, and I was like, okay, that's not an airplane. Like, what is that? And so as I was looking, I could see almost like ripples or like glimmers off the edges, and I could start to tell that it was actually an alien mothership, and it was very elongated, like very tall in orientation, but like not wide. So, and then the shape of it was kind of strange. It was a little bit asymmetrical, so it was almost like a bold serif font I, where there were like two parallel edges and then like a very long cross beam that was a little bit diagonal, which was like the main part of the ship. So it was like a very strange sort of a ship, like, oh, like what is that? but that, like, I could tell that it was still cloaked. And so like the way I had seen it was there was just a small distortion of the starlight and a slight reflection of the moonlight on the edges. But as I was observing it, as it was kind of moving just very slightly, it started to come into view more clearly. And then as I was watching it, it actually transformed into a microscope. And I was like, what in the world? Like, and it seemed like maybe this was like trying to say that like the whatever was there was like actually beginning to focus more intently on something, to like to look closer in on something. And obviously it was like right above this area where we were in the church. Okay, so there began to be more and more lights in the sky overhead. And what I could tell was that there were some sort of military jets or some sort of flying objects with weaponry. And there were at least like 3 or 4 of them in the sky at the very beginning when I heard some sort of a national announcement. And it was like some sort of like emergency broadcast system, like being like projected over all the airwaves. And it said something about like, you know, everyone needed to take cover, that there was something seen in the sky over Japan, that there were similar sightings like in different cities. And then like as this announcement was happening, then all the power went out suddenly. And then I thought, like, I had this thought at that moment, like, oh, I probably should have said something earlier to all these people here. Like, because I knew I was like the only one seeing this. And I was just like taking part of this event that was going on around me. And I was like, oh my goodness, like I probably should have, you know, like this could have been awkward, but I probably should have told someone what I was seeing so that like these people would be prepared and not just like freaked out because all of a sudden the power is going out. So, you know, guys, hopefully I'm doing that now. So anyway, my husband immediately like pointed out that it's going to start getting cold like really fast. So we should, everyone, you know, he was coordinating everyone in the church, like we should think about preserving heat. So I thought like, okay, let's make sure we close all the doors. And then there was like a lady who gathered a whole bunch of things like paper and I think even like hymnals and things like that, and started a bonfire right in the middle of the sanctuary. She used one of those little candles, you know, you can find. And so she like lit a fire, and there's just like this big bonfire in the middle of the sanctuary. And so my husband said, good. And then someone else put so there were lots of people quickly huddling around the fire and contributing to the fire, and there was just a big bonfire in the middle of the sanctuary. So people that were in other parts of the church, like especially kids, were being collected into the sanctuary. And I went and gathered my kids from like some of the daycare workers or Sunday school workers or whatever they were. And then so I took like my baby who was there at the time, and then my husband like held one of our younger daughters. And I wanted us all to be near the fire. Like that felt like that was very important, to be close to the fire. Like to be far away from the fire like felt scary, and like it would be very bad to be far away from the fire. So but then I just had this sense that there was just this very dark presence that was closing in around the building that we were in. And I just knew, like, okay, you know what? Like, we're all being attracted toward this fire, but like, we have to leave. We actually can't stay here. Like, this fire is too temporary. Like, we have to get out. So I called my family, and again, this sort of reveals my orientation. Like, I'm just thinking about saving myself, right? Like, I just like leave the whole church building there to fend for themselves. But anyway, so I called our family and rushed out to the back door, and I kept gathering all of my family members together so that no one would be separated or left behind. And there were lots of like lasers and bullets and weapons and like lots of energy weapons and other things like firing across the sky from like obviously some sort of battle going on in the air now. It was just very explicit now. So it was so much that it looked like a checkerboard of lines of light. And then I intently prayed in cooperation or like in conversation with my family, especially my older son, that all of us, like our whole family, including our cat, would be relocated to the desert. So that's interesting that I asked to be relocated to the desert. So there's some symbolism there. But anyway, so Josh, or my husband, mentioned like he just added this point, like, okay, only transport us to the desert if it's not already occupied, like by these alien presences. Okay. So anyway, while we were like having this prayer, this cooperative prayer, a huge red glowing meteor started falling, and I saw that it was headed straight for us. And it was like, oh my goodness, okay, like we're done for. And then it's like, okay, so we just kept moving. And the other thing is I felt like once we were out of the church, I felt like there were security cameras everywhere. And like there were like all of these soldiers and troops like just wandering the streets. I had this feeling like there was nowhere we could go. Like we were going to be seen, and then we were going to be basically trapped, or like someone was going to find us, like that it was inevitable. So anyway, I had the feeling of like, oh my goodness, like this is like, there's going to be nothing that we can do. Like things are just like horrible. It's all falling apart around us, and like we're done for. So I saw that this meteor was actually just headed straight toward us, and but we just kind of kept moving, and the meteor fell very close in front of us on the ground, and I was afraid of the imminent explosion that was going to be resulting from the meteor smashing into the ground. It was kind of like this simultaneous, like, here it comes smashing, and I'm like afraid that it's going to have this huge, like, it's going to like incinerate us basically. So then it was like in a moment, in an instant, like while I was having those thoughts, suddenly, instantly, we were just transported to a very high-tech mansion. So it was like instantly, like we just relocated. And so in a sense, it was like, oh, okay, I guess our prayers were answered, you know? And it felt very mysterious and like there was some sort of divine guidance or something that was happening there. So this place where we were transported had very beautiful grounds, like it was a large estate, and it had very large windows, and again, it was like very high tech, very modern, like it was like a millionaire or billionaire like hideout bunker, like that's what it felt like. And it was still nighttime, and I somehow had the feeling that this was actually our mansion that we owned somehow. And so I saw that there was like a huge like desk in the middle of like one of these rooms, like a big computer, like very powerful, like sorts of information grabbing things that could be accomplished there. So I wanted to go over and like quickly like try to find some information. But then while I was like having that thought, like I want to go try to look for information, suddenly I saw like these lights outside. And I was like, okay, we're not safe. We're not safe even here. And by the way, I felt like this mansion was actually like in a very secret location, like maybe in some like very isolated island somewhere. So it was like very far from like ordinary civilization. Like it wasn't just like in a city or, you know, close to ordinary operations of things. It was a very secret sort of a base, but again, it's like there were lights outside, and so I knew we had to get out of there. So we all, like, I gathered all of us, and we were going through this glass hallway that normally would have been very beautiful, going through like this beautiful, outdoor landscape that you could see on either side. But in this condition felt like, oh my goodness, like we're so exposed and this is so dangerous to be going through this hallway right now. But anyway, so we went through the hallway in order to get to the other half of the mansion, where I felt like there was like some sort of a possible escape route, like through some sort of a back exit. And I was telling my husband, okay, we need to find the way out. Like, and it was like, we kind of knew that this was our place, but it was almost like we didn't really know, like, even like what the floor plan was of the place, or like where things were. Like, it was like I had this weird feeling, like, you know how sometimes dream locations are. So anyway, I was like trying to find the way out, and it's like, oh man, like where's the way out? And so like finally it was like, okay, here's a stairway, let's go down the stairway. And down the stairway, oh, there's a door. Okay. So just as we were about to come to that door, suddenly these beings that looked like soldier type beings kicked the door open. And I think it was like double doors. They kicked the double doors open, and then they had like these guns like pointed at us, some sort of weapons of some sort. And the beings themselves actually looked like maybe like bionic humans, like they had some sort of electrical components built in with, actually they looked very human. But I had the feeling like that they weren't actually like from Earth human. But anyway, so it was just like, oh my goodness, like, and it wasn't just like, the couple or 3 or 4 that came in. It was like, I saw like there was a huge, group of those sorts of beings outside. So it was like, okay, like we're done for now. So I'm like raising my hands in surrender. And so did my family around me. And I was still holding my baby in one hand, and I noted that it was my right hand. So I was still holding my baby in my right hand, and I'm like, raising up my other hand, like in surrender. So these, bionic human beings, led us outside to an area where they were collecting other humans. And so suddenly now we were sort of like being collected, like there were lots of humans being collected toward a similar area. Now, I saw along the way of like where we were all being collected to, these very large machine-like entities. They actually looked like completely robotic, like there was no human-looking portion of them. And the picture that I have is they looked a little bit like maybe like a matte bronzy color or copperish sort of color, very broad sort of shoulders, very mechanical, like broad, like strong looking arms, and coming down to like a sleek body that has like sort of an impression of maybe a male figure. And then like right in the front of these like machine-like entities, they didn't really even have a head. It was kind of like all like together, like the shoulders and the head were kind of like together. And then the eyes were kind of like embedded then like in the chest. And then there was some sort of like a mechanical like claw arm that was hanging from the nose and mouth area. And so like I just kind of saw some of these like to the side as we were walking. So we were being funneled by these like bionic humans, and we were being funneled toward this area where they're collecting humans. And so I saw these beings to the side. And so as we were being given instructions of where to go, one of those machine-like entities that I saw actually did something kind of like silly. It like took its like arm and it hit its like claw, mouth, nose thing. And it made like some sort of a funny clanging noise. And there was like a human / bionic human like next to this machine. And this, it was like a lady. And so this lady said, Sophie, no, like in a very hushed, scolding way. And like suddenly I like had this like, oh my goodness, like this knowledge that this big, huge machine-like entity in some way actually had like, I don't know if it was just like the soul or if it was like the body of this girl. Like somehow it was like there was like I think something around like a 6-year-old girl that was just like trapped inside of this machine entity, and that she maybe had some sort of very severe, maybe like mental or physical conditions that made it so that she couldn't just be like converted to like the bionic human and be like purely functional. Like it was like her whole being like had to be like basically absorbed into this machine. And it was like there was something about it was like her soul was the thing that was like powering this machine. And the playful sort of behavior that this little girl inside this huge machine body was displaying that she hadn't yet been sort of like completely uploaded in her consciousness, like to like the brainwashing of like this collective like controlling force that was like over all of these beings. And so she hadn't yet been converted. She was still in the early stages. And I had the feeling that maybe the person that was next to her was like maybe her mother. But her mother was like, and still like they were in the early stages of like being abducted and stuff. So it's like the mother was obviously operating out of fear, but also like wanting to have her daughter not stand out of line in terms of the expectation of the program. So anyway, so that put aside, all the human beings were being now forced toward this area where they were being collected. And there were these, the only way I can really describe it is that there were like 2 different lines that had like, kind of like the conveyor belts with the x-ray scanners and things that are kind of like at airports. It was something kind of like that. And there were 2 of them, 2 lines. And but they were like way more sophisticated and they're way longer. Like they like you could look and you could see like they went a very far way into the distance. And on these conveyor belts there were all of these pods, and they were kind of like transparent pods, and everyone was being forced like they were put into one of the lines, and then they were being forced to go individual by individual into these capsules, and then they were instructed to put on an oxygen mask. And then I had this like intuition, like, oh, the reason that they're putting on an oxygen mask is because the place where we're being transported has an ammonia or nitrous atmosphere. So it actually wasn't consistent with our biology. And so the oxygen masks were sort of like in order to keep us alive. Okay, so then there was a bionic lady who was there dressed in a soldier's outfit, and this lady was there directing people toward the different lines. And so when I came up there, like, this bionic lady, I guess, she was transferring us to another person. I'm sorry. She was transferring us to another person who was there directing people to the lines, but she was also directing us to the lines. She was kind of at the head of the group that had captured us. And so she told me reassuringly but firmly that my baby could not stay with me, like in my same capsule, like where I was going to be going. And so she was basically saying, like, okay, you're going to have to give your baby to us. Like, we're going to take care. Like, we're going to make sure everything's all right. You know, everything's fine. You know, just listen. Like, this is all going to be over soon. Like, it's all, you know, all the sort of reassuring language. And I was just like, but wait. Couldn't you feed like a different mask over into this capsule so that we could both be in the same capsule? But then the lady like already anticipated that I was objecting, and she's like, no, like that is impossible. We have to put him in his own capsule. And there was like this weird feeling that I was having like in that moment where it was like the lady's voice was carrying this very, very firm, confident authority that was actually like transferring to me as like, oh, like, okay, like if I'm listening to her, like like things are probably going to be okay. Like, okay, I'm following the rules. Everything's going to be okay. But then like there was something inside of me that was screaming, no, this is horrible. This is horrible. Get out of here. Get out of here. But it was almost like I felt like I was like almost like being lulled, like, okay, as long as I just kind of follow, like she's giving me these instructions, it's all going to be okay. And so like somehow like in the midst of that internal struggle I was having, like I just handed over my baby to her, and it was like, oh, okay, like okay, I will accept that or something. And it was like, you know, very confusing, like what in the world am I doing? And so as we're now being put into these capsules, the capsules are all being scanned. And now at this point, I'm kind of seeing everything more from like a third person perspective. And so the capsules are all being scanned. And as each capsule was being scanned, it was like all of the defects were being exposed like onto this computer, this very high-tech computer, so that if anyone had any sort of a physical imbalance or any sort of a something that was a defect of any sort, any physical defect, then there was some sort of a solution that was prescribed so that then their body would just be healed, or that whatever it was that was the problem would just be resolved. So anyway, when I was scanned, I saw like from the top that when I was scanned, I was assigned a lock key joint implant. So I have no idea what that means, but anyway, it was like I had this thought, oh, like maybe like I have like loose joints like in my hips or something, and so like they were like, oh, like that's not like acceptable, like we have to like put in like different hip joint or something. And then there was like another man who was assigned some sort of a fix to some of his internal organs. And then it was very strange because along with like the people being scanned in the capsules, there were also like equipment pieces being scanned, and there were like different like human devices, like very common devices like scissors and things that were like being scanned, like all in the same like row, and it was very strange. So then, so as the people kind of went through this process, and it was like assigned to them what was going to be fixed, and I had the feeling that all the fixes were actually like bionic sort of fixes, so that it was going to integrate some sort of robotic or electronic components like into the person's biology, so that it's like what they're doing is they're not actually just like healing the body, they're actually upgrading or implanting with this sort of technology. And of course, none of this is with anybody's consent. So anyway, I was seeing that people were now, as they were being fed through the system, the pods got further down the sort of conveyor belt, and along the way, at some point, there were these things that were being inserted into the ears, and whatever these things were, they were creating very, very loud, disruptive, like disturbing noises. That was kind of like, I guess, like very loud white noise or something. But it was like, I kind of have the feeling of like having the internal experience and like kind of seeing it from the outside at the same time. So it was like the internal experience was like that it was so loud and disruptive that I could not even hear my own internal thoughts. Like, you know how you have like thoughts in your mind, and like this is how you can determine like, you know, what you think about something or what you're about to say or what you feel about something. It was like all that was gone. It was just like like this stuff. It was just like so loud. And this was like so disturbing because it was like I knew that this was like a precursor to then being programmed, like that the trajectory was that like we were actually as human beings not going to be able to even have our own internal thoughts, like that our own internal thoughts were going to be taken away. And so like this part of it was where it just got so horrific, because it was like the very core of like being a human being, like being an actual person, was now like, it's like they, you know, they can change your body, like they can put, you know, implants on you or whatever, but like the actual experience of you being blocked from your own internal thoughts and feelings, like was so, it was like, oh my goodness, it was so horrific. Like I was like, no, like this is horrible. Like everything inside of my emotions and my consciousness was saying no, like like and I felt like even within the dream, I felt like the sort of emotional experience of it was kind of shielded from me, so I didn't feel it to its full effects, because otherwise if I would have felt it to its full effects, like I would have been very traumatized, like I feel, and I definitely did not react in the way I would have maybe expected if that was definitely like real. So anyway, that's it. That's the end of the dream. And so I woke up from that dream, like, and I didn't write down how I woke up from it, but I remember having the experience of it being like, oh my goodness, like this dream is very horrible. Like, like what is going on? And so I want to actually just, given that dream, and I know that was a very long sort of detailed dream, but I wanted to, give all of that as a baseline to actually then open a discussion, concerning, I think a lot of people have had dreams that are sort of cataclysmic in nature, or that have this sort of maybe alien invasion, or like some of these elements that are in this dream have been a common occurrence for a lot of people. And I want to just like mention like a few different things. Like one is that I feel like there's a group of people who, if they have this sort of a dream, then there's like an immediate association that, yes, like there are some very horrible things that are coming in the future. And maybe even like there's this statement like, oh yeah, like aliens are real, and these aliens are actually demonic, like Luciferian in nature, and like all like the world's going to hell, you know, like, and then like, you know, all of this stuff. And then like, you know, maybe after that, like, you know, but that's definitely the next thing that's coming, like in human history on the earth. And then maybe there's like, you know, some redemption that comes after that. But so that's kind of like one sort of energy that I've come across when people are dealing with this sort of a dream. There's like another sort of energy that I come across, which is like people are saying, okay, like there are things that you can actually pick up from maybe like the sort of subconscious or like the mass consciousness of all the human beings. Like maybe these are like our worst fears, or maybe this is like the, you know, like the shadow of our psychology or something. So that it's more like trying to reveal like your internal psychology or something like that. This is all like a symbolism for something that you were trying to overcome, like, you know, as an individual, or like even as a race, as a human race, we're trying to like overcome some of the maybe the outside authorities that are maybe erasing some of our individuation. And so it's more of like a psychological analysis. And then there's like this other analysis that I've come across, which is that actually there's different possibilities about the future. There's different timelines. There's different things that could actually happen. And it all is dependent on what we choose to do. So what I've heard a lot of people say is like, well, there's actually kind of like two main possibilities at this time in history, like that we can actually decide like what will happen on our planet. And one is sort of a history where we overcome some of these power structures and systems and some of the problems that we've been experiencing, and that the earth sort of like moves into this phase of everyone just sort of waking up to like all the bad stuff, all the controlling coercive powers that have been at work, both inside their own hearts and inside like the different systems that we have in our society. And that we sort of like wake up to this, and then we're like, okay, like something has to change. And we all sort of realize this at once, and then it sort of like blossoms into this very peaceful and abundant society that then takes over the whole earth, right? And then there's like this other timeline, which is that, well, actually people are just kind of not realizing that they're under these strong authorities, that they're not even thinking for themselves, that like they're in a sense like just being programmed, and that if people continue to go on that path and make those choices, and that they aren't going to like look to try to find the greater reality, if they're not going to try to be more loving toward others, but instead are going to be more divisive and hateful and combative with others, then that sort of opens up this sort of real possibility of some of the things that I'm sharing in this dream. Like, actually, it opens the door for some of these more powerful negative forces, these negative beings, to actually come and invade this reality and sort of set up a more extreme version of maybe even like what we're already agreeing to as humanity. Like, we're already in a sense agreeing or complicit with this sort of coercive force if we're sort of like just fighting and hating and like our like it's us against you against, like we're all just gonna like fight against each other. That's the solution, is like we want ourselves to feel validated and to like to prove that we are like better, or to prove that we're right or whatever. That sort of energy like leads to this sort of general degradation of society and opening the door toward entities that are perhaps spiritually and technologically more advanced in their journeys, to then come and sort of facilitate that reality to become more manifest upon the earth, which would then lead to all of these very negative things then playing themselves out. And I think it's actually very interesting, because if you think about this with respect to even in the Christian community, how it seems like there's kind of a lot of division right now concerning what is sort of the next big step in the prophetic timeline concerning humanity. Like, well, are we about to enter into the age of like, well, here's going to be, the unleashing of the Antichrist, and he's going to have power over everyone, and everyone's going to have to take the mark, and then, he's going to control all these things, and then it's going to be like this huge system, and there's going to be persecution of everyone who doesn't agree, and it's just like this horrible sort of projection of like what's going to happen to like all the humans. And then, of course, it's like everyone who sort of falls into that controlling system on the Christian frame, it's like, well, there's a point where then that comes to a point of judgment, like an ending. There's an ending of that. And, often it's like, well, that's associated with like Jesus is returning, and then there's going to be a peaceful rule on earth, but it's initiated by like Jesus coming, because Jesus has to save us. Like, we can't actually achieve that on our own. Like, on our own, then everything is just like headed toward this very evil direction, and the Antichrist gains more and more power. Everything is going in this evil direction, and then it's like we have to be like saved to like get out of that. Right. So that's like kind of like this one Christian frame. And then like this other Christian frame is that it's like, well, actually, no, like we have the choice and the ability. Like, there's always going to be evil intentions and evil powers that are on the earth, like trying to do whatever they're doing. But we can actually, as people of light, as light bearers, as people of God, whatever you want to say, that we can actually do something to actually affect change in those systems, in those ways, in those people, in the trajectory of the earth, and that we can actually lead people toward something that is more positive, a more positive outcome. And so if we can do that, then what that means is that then, like all of these things that are kind of coming against, it's not just fatalistic, like, like all these things have come against, so I guess it's just time to relent and surrender and say, oh man, I guess this is the time that we're going to be persecuted now. But instead, it's like, no, like when those things are coming against, like that's actually a signal that this is the time where we need to press forward and to be able to like really just work it out, like in our own souls, like, and within society, like what it really looks like to be within a frame that is actually a frame that's more loving and compassionate, rather than maybe like an old frame, the frame that's fighting against that frame, the one that's controlling, coercive, and hate filled. And that if we do that, then that actually opens up a whole new era of prosperity. So it's kind of interesting to see that those sorts of different pictures like kind of come up in different communities of people, and it seems like it kind of like falls toward usually one or the other. Like either you're kind of having the energy of like, it's almost like inevitable that things are kind of negative and that they're going to go that way. Or it's like, oh no, you can be like optimistic. Like things are going to go more positive. Things are going to be like turning out better. And so I want to just bring that in to the discussion, because I feel like there is actually a matter of choice, like that we can actually choose whether we want to almost like just agree, like that things are just fatalistic and that this is just what's going to happen. And kind of like how in my dream, like I just kind of was like hightailing it out of the church and just leaving everybody to fend for themselves. And I'm just going to try to escape and get out of here. It's like, I mean, when I look back at that now, like, I mean, that is just like a little bit over a year ago. It's like, oh man, I guess I wasn't very virtuous. And then, but it's like, there's a difference between like feeling like, well, all I can preserve is myself. Like, I'm just going to try to be, I'm just going to try to be awakened and enlightened myself, and I'm going to try to be sanctified or like right with God myself, and I can't really control or like really affect anybody else. So, it looks like the whole world is going to hell and there's nothing I can really do about it anyway, so hopefully it won't turn out so bad for me, So like that is kind of like one energy, and there is another energy, which it's almost like, I think maybe what I've been like pondering and thinking about over the past few years, and kind of like coming to like more of a what feels like sight. It feels like sight, and I can perhaps create another video to explain more what I mean about that. But it feels like you actually do have the ability to choose some degree what sort of a reality you want to experience, and that your reality will sort of conform to what you expect the reality to be. And so like, I guess the question is, if I am like my own individual person, but I am on a planet where there's lots of, billions of individual people, I actually, in a sense, like can't really control what everybody else does. So I guess that is true. But in a sense, like, what can I control? Well, I think I can control my own choice, my own attitude, my own disposition, my own stance concerning reality, concerning the future, concerning what I'm going to invest in, concerning, what I'm going to choose to believe going forward, what I choose to expect, what I choose to sort of like just put up my hands and say, I guess this is just how it is, the sort of fatalistic sort of energy. And I can also choose, like, what am I going to fight for, and what am I going to reject? And that just seems to become, like, as I've been, like, just pondering that, it seems like that has just been more and more almost like confirmed, like, to myself, that there's some truth to that. So I'm not necessarily saying what is going to happen in the future, because I don't believe that it's completely up to me. I think that there is something about, like, there's like everyone's decision together about what we're going to do and what we're going to agree with and what we're going to put up with, and what we're fighting for and what we're not fighting for. So in a sense, I can't really say like my own thought about what actually is going to happen, but I can say something about what I think our attitude can be. And I think that our attitude can be, why wouldn't we want to push for the most optimistic, positive outcome that we possibly can? And to me, that seems like that's just like a basic rule. Like, if I'm in the middle of a jungle and I don't see food anywhere, and like I could just, lay down in the dirt and just say, well, I guess I can't survive, and I mean, I could have that attitude, or I could be like, well, you know what? Like, this is a hard circumstance, but I'm going to do the best I can, and I'm going to like press forward toward like the most positive outcome I can find. And, everyone has to decide for themselves, like how much emotional and psychological and spiritual energy they have to engage in the various areas of warfare that there are occurring on the earth right now. So, I mean, we're all in this together in a certain sense, but I would say, like, given my own reflections, and there's so many dreams I haven't shared with you guys yet, and so many other interesting thoughts and things, and hopefully we'll be able to have more of those discussions in the future. But I think that all of those things that I feel like I've been kind of sorting through and dealing through with myself, I feel like there's something very important about how we choose personally to align ourselves and what we are expecting and what our attitude is. And one of the main take-home attitudes that maybe I would encourage you to consider for yourself is whether you are looking outwardly toward the world with a sort of fatalism, or maybe even a feeling of hatred towards some other people, like, oh, those people over there are making life like so horrible, or like, you know, like projecting those sort of that negative energy outward, or else like absorbing it inwardly, like in the form of fear, like, oh, I'm so scared of what's going to happen. And to maybe shift as much as you can, shifting that energy from, okay, like, you know what, like, people are acting a certain way for a reason, and I can actually be loving toward a person whether or not I agree that their behaviors are actually productive or you know, good from my perspective. But I can actually still be loving toward that person, because I actually don't want that person to be like suffering, like even if I think that it's like sort of well deserved. Like, I don't have to have the attitude that, oh, like, you just deserve to be suffering now, and actually I hate you for causing my life to be suffering, so I want you to go suffer, you know. Like, that's more of a hateful attitude. But instead, if it's like, oh no, like, you know, like, I've not always had all the right thoughts, and I probably still have a lot of thoughts that aren't right, and I don't want people to project like hateful energy toward me. So if I don't want that projected toward me, like, oh, like, you're just, you know, you're just trying to do this, or you're just, you know, you're so deceived, you're so brainwashed, or you're so like, it's like, I don't want people projecting that onto me. I want people to love me and to help me. And if I'm blind in a certain way and I don't see things clearly, and somebody else thinks they see things clearly, like, I would like it if they would, like, you know, gently, like, and without a controlling sort of an attitude, like, just offer the sorts of things that they would see from their perspective that they think might help me. And so if that's what I would want done to me, well then, maybe that's what I can do to others, you know? So, so anyway, I think that there's a way of like, incorporating and integrating the feeling of like, there really are like evils, and there really are bad things, and there really are people who are doing bad things on the earth. And, how do we actually confront that? Like, do we just be like, oh, like, this is just going to happen, and, you know, these people, they're always going to be that way, and things are always going to be like this, and things are just getting worse, and there's nothing I can do about it, and I just hate you for that? Or are we going to take a different attitude and be more like in the realm of the imagination, thinking like, how can this change? Or how could we help people who are in these sort of cycles? Or how could we, you know, produce conversations that are more constructive in actually leading people to see more things that are going to help them to be able to think for themselves. And that feels like, you know, or even asking ourselves like the hard questions, like, instead of just saying like, all of society is just, you know, just going downhill. What if we say like, okay, so how would we actually change society? Like, what would we do? Like, if we were in charge right now, if we were the mayor of our city, like, what would we start with? Like, what law would we change? Or like, what law would we remove? Or, you know, what sort of a action or behavior would we display that's different than what we see right now that would actually lead to a positive change? And when we start thinking in that building or constructive mode, suddenly all the questions like become actually harder, but like more productive. And we enter into that more cooperative energy with other people who are actually trying to answer the same question. And maybe, yeah, we might have different opinions and different perspectives on what actually is the best method. But if we're in that sort of constructive building energy, then it's less likely that we're going to be fighting and tearing each other down. And then I think opening ourselves up to those destructive forces than if we're, actually trying to accomplish a goal that actually has a positive outcome. So anyway, I think that even though we can't control everyone, and we know that there are people on the earth who actually don't have those positive goals in mind, that we can do the best that we can to, in our own life, in our own interactions with people, to think about, okay, how can I actually be in a sort of constructive mode with this other person? How can I actually offer the things that I think I see, and I'm almost like annoyed that they're so ignorant or whatever, I could be annoyed at the other person and just leave it at that. Or I could say, okay, how can I actually convert the things that I see that I think are actually beneficial to me? How can I convert that into a form that the other person can receive, and not be so controlling about it, but instead, like, it's a gift. It's a free gift that I actually, from my own heart, am offering it for free, and they are free to accept or reject that. And it's my job to then make the gift like more and more attractive. So it's like, then it's putting it on me. Like, it's actually up to my own personal development and my own ability to like refine my own thinking, my own ability to advertise things. Like I really need to like think about, how can I translate these things that I think are so important and are so true into actual like real life tangible results. Like what is actually different for me that I believe this, like, or what's actually happening in my life that is a direct result of me holding this attitude or having this disposition. And how maybe in the past did I have a different disposition, and how did that lead to a different result? And I think that having the power of those stories, that testimony, is going to actually be, I think, a good starting point for creating that sort of attractiveness that we need in order to actually build that cooperative environment that actually leads people toward more cooperative results and positive ends. And so anyway, I wanted to just leave that thought with you, because I feel like I want to share with you more dreams that I've had, like of similar nature to this dream that I've shared in this video. But I also want it to be prefaced with this sort of open dialogue, this open discussion, so that we can sort of like build from here and then continue to see sort of like, okay, like what does this data tell us, and what does that imply for where we're going, and what's the best way to respond to all of this. So hopefully this is all helpful to you, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video to continue this discussion. It's fun. Thanks for listening, guys.